Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this first in our series of autumn webinars from Cosmetics Cluster UK. In this webinar, we're joined by a panel from over the seas, mainly in North America, but also from the UK. It's a truly international event, which is fantastic. And we're hoping to provide a forum to discuss the need for traceability and sustainability within the cosmetic supply chain. Just to give you a little background on the UK cluster, we're a small team, and my board member, Kirsty, is with us today, and possibly, I think, Alistair as well. He's one of our directors. The cluster is the first cosmetics cluster in the UK, and really we aim to be a network of networks and connect companies along the value chain in the cosmetics industry. We've got 4 key pillars of focus, and sustainability is one of those areas of focus. So it's an important topic that we're covering through today's webinar. The 4 key pillars you can see here, and we've got another webinar coming up in October with NBIC, which is the National Biofuels Innovation Centre, and that will be in our research and innovation pillar. And another one in sustainability with iBio-IC in November. So we've got some really interesting topics coming up after today. Here are just a few of our members, and we're growing all the time, so that's really exciting. The global cluster is something which we are part of, and I represent the UK on the board of that. If you're interested in any sort of international collaborations and activities, then the global cluster is a great way to actually participate and share information and innovation internationally. So today, here are our speakers and panelists, and I'm going to hand over to Barbara Brockway, who is going to be our moderator today, and also to give an introduction to the panel and our topic. So I'm handing over to Barbara now.
Hello, thank you, Jane, for the introduction. It's very, very nice to be here. I suspect quite a few people know me because I've been with the SCS for a long while. I'd like to say how important I think the Cosmetic Cluster UK is, because a cluster of like-minded people can make things happen very quickly, where however well-meaning an individual company may be on their own, it can't happen. So that's one of the reasons why everybody here is very pleased to talk to you today. Now, this webinar is your webinar. We have Kirsty working very hard in the back room to get the questions that you need answered up in front of our panelists so that you can get the answers as quickly as we can. Today is all about the difference between belief and certainty. So you may believe things are happening how they should be, but can you be certain? So just to see how you all feel at the moment, we've got a poll. So you should be seeing in front of your screen, it should be saying transparency and sustainability in the cosmetic industry. Is this important in the cosmetic industry? So do you think it's very important, or do you think it's just a trend? If you could give an opinion there. And we're going to ask some of these questions at the end just to see if we've changed your mind. Now, the second question is very pertinent. Are you confident that the materials you use are free from modern slavery, from fraud, from substitution, or tampering? And we're talking about sustainability. So think also, is that palm oil you're using really from a sustainable source, or has it come from the dark economy? So how do you feel? Just while you're filling in the form, I'll let you know that there's approximately 40.3 million people in the world who are part of modern slavery. So somebody out there somewhere must be using the materials that they are making. So are you confident the materials you use, that they're all free from modern slavery? Now, the third question is, how sure are you that the claims made by brand suppliers are correct? And if you think of things like, we say that it's, well, we mentioned RSPO palm oil, certified organic. How sure that if it says that this is a vegan certified material, that that really is what it is? Or if we look at companies like the Body Shop and Natura, where they use community traded materials, you're sure that they're using community traded material? This is your personal belief. So we've given you, if you scroll down on that poll, you'll see, are you 100% sure, 75, 50, 40, 15% sure, or not sure at all? Thank you. Right, now, one of the problems that I do have with this webinar is if I just read everybody's CVs, that would be our hour. So I'm going to go quickly move on a bit. I do want to say, I've asked Kirsty to put a link to a BBC YouTube video. It's only a couple of minutes, and it's Anne Reid, where she talks about how all the problems in the world really are our fault. It's all to do with our choices. If we make the right choices, we can make a difference. So if you imagine that all supply chains are completely secure, then people who are clearing rainforests to grow palm oil, which is not sustainable, they'd have no market for their palm oil. And then we wouldn't have to clear any more rainforests. I have it from Chris Sainer at Croda that there's enough clearance of the rainforest for palm oil now. We've got enough plantations. We don't need any more. So there would be no incentive if people couldn't market these things. So if we could make our supply chains secure with certainty, then we can make a difference. We will make a difference to climate change. We will use only sustainable materials. So that's why I feel that it's so important that we're all here together. And I'd now like to start with our panelists. And the first expert panelist that I want to go to is Jo Greenwood. Jo, you're Technical Director, EMEA for Applied DNA Sciences. And Applied DNA Sciences is a biotech company which specializes in using molecular DNA to help customers deliver on their goals and objectives as far as supply chain traceability and transparency is concerned. Now, you really are an expert in the field of forensic science. You've been working for over 19 years in the sector, and you've been developing forensic science technologies, using them to protect all sorts of different assets and brands. And you've worked for Applied DNA for 7 years, implementing DNA taggings across the wide varieties of industries. Now, I know you as a very practical person, and I know you as somebody who puts a lab coat on and goes out there, runs the PCR and gets the results. So if you'd like to just tell everybody here about what you do. Thanks.
Thank you, Barbara, for that very kind introduction, and thank you also, Jane and Kirsty, for your work in putting this webinar together. Yeah, Barbara, DNA identification, it's probably something best known from the use in forensics, from the use in the criminal justice system. And as a gold standard of forensic identification, we can take that and we can apply it to supply chains, enabling raw materials and finished goods to be traced, throughout their lifetime. I mean, over the last 18 months or so, I think we've probably all heard rather more about PCR and DNA than maybe we actually would have liked to have done. But it does mean that people now have a real understanding of how PCR can be used to amplify or copy tiny, tiny amounts of DNA to give a high enough concentration that we can test for whether it's a virus or whether it's the authentication of a cosmetic. We use this same technology, the same technology that's being used to test for COVID, to authenticate goods from just trace amounts of DNA that we're adding during the manufacturing process. The tags we use are unique identifiers. They're manufactured from short chains of synthetically produced DNA sequences. And we formulate them both for compatibility with the product that is being tagged, but also for robustness so that the DNA will persist through manufacturing. And sometimes that throws quite interesting challenges at us, such as designing tags that will survive temperatures of, say, 300 degrees centigrade when you're extruding a polymer. We add the tags to raw ingredients. We can mix them into finished product, or we can apply them in the printing that goes on a label or in the packaging. So you can layer up the security, no impact, hopefully, on the product performance or the safety. And once they're tagged, the products can then be tested, and they can be tested for their authenticity, tested that they are what they say they are, either in the Applied DNA Science laboratories or they can be tested in field, depending on how the customer wants to carry this out. And as you touched on, Barbara, there's a lot of product claims. It might be certified sustainable, it could be fair trade, cruelty-free. They're on the cosmetics we buy. They're on so many of the other goods that we will go out and purchase. And a lot of these claims rely on just a paper chain. But using DNA tags, we can forensically back up those claims. We can provide proof of origin of the ingredients as they pass through the supply chain. And individual producers, individual regions could even have their own unique tag, allowing the origin to be traced, whether it's of a raw material or an ingredient or the final product. And we use these 3 pillars. We tag the product, we test the product, and then we trace the product to make up what we call our certainty platform. And then we can use that to increase transparency and traceability across global supply chains. As you touched on, Barbara, it's not just cosmetics, it's a wide variety of fields that we've carried out DNA tagging in. Personally, I've been working in everything from textiles, natural, synthetic, to fertilizers. I could use up the rest of the hour on that, but I won't go into detail because time is short, and to be honest, I'd much prefer to be answering any questions anyone else has, either during the webinar or, of course, afterwards.
So, Jo, I know you as a practical person. Can you show everybody a typical portable PCR? Because we have our COVID tests and then they're sent away and we don't get the results back for sometimes overnight, a couple of days. Now, you and I know, and I know Paul's going to support this later on, that we can actually get these tests over in would I be correct in saying 20, 30 minutes, you can know whether a tag's present or not?
Half an hour, certainly less than an hour with all your preparation. I mean, the kind of kit I would stick in a rucksack and travel around Europe with would be a device like this, which is a qPCR device. Anyone think we planned this, Barbara?
Well, there's even smaller ones, aren't there? I've seen one that fits on a smartphone. So
your samples just go in here in these tiny little tubes.
Now, you're a molecular biologist. I am as well. We all know Eppendorf tubes, but our colleague Tony, who I suspect is in amongst the delegates, he's not technical at all. And you sent him out to Africa, didn't you, to show that tags were present in fertilizer? And he was very proud. He did it all on his own. No need for a degree in science.
Yeah, this equipment's very, as you say, very simple to operate. You can be trained to use it very quickly, and as you say, we're always working on smaller, easier to use pieces of equipment. But no, for this kind of authentication, you don't necessarily need to be, in a full lab environment. Warren, I bought this device, in fact, up to your facility and used it in a tannery environment, which isn't necessarily what you'd think of as the most lab-like conditions. And it's very simple to use. I've trained people in less than an hour to be able to prepare and run the samples.
And we could probably run the webinar on our own. Am I right in saying these are the auditor's friends, because they stay in the materials throughout the journey? And it's not as with an auditor, the second they come into a facility, everything is done to be correct. And then as soon as the auditor leaves, we all have a sigh of relief because the audit's over. But this is there all the time, and it can be checked anywhere along the supply chain, can't it? So just before I leave you, Jo, how much material would you take to put in that Eppendorf tube to test?
I'm not sure if you can see, but this is the size of the tubes this particular device uses. So we would generally just use a small swab to take a very small swabbing of whatever material we're looking at. That could be an area that's just a few millimeters in size that we're swabbing to just take the tiny tip to put in this. It's so small I can't even show it properly.
Well, that's the joy of PCR, isn't it? The amplification of a tiny amount of DNA in a relatively quick time. Jo, brilliant. I'm sure people are going to be asking questions for you to answer. Jo Chicoli this time, the second of our Joes. Jo, it's fantastic to have you here. It's fantastic. All our panelists can give up time, but wait till you hear me read your CV. You are founder, president, and CEO of Biocogent. And I know Biocogent very well as an ingredient supplier to the cosmetic industry, but some of our delegates may not know you because your ingredients are, to quote Paul, very next generation, aren't they? They're the ingredients now and of the future. Your focus, Biocogent's focused on invention, development, manufacture, and commercialization of skin-active molecules and treatment products used in regulated OTC, Medicare, personal care, and consumer products. So you're wider than just the cosmetic industry. And you're operating in Long Island, very close to Applied DNA. And you've got a portfolio of products that you sell globally. Now, before you started Biocogent, you were the Global Director of Operations at BASF Corporation, which I'm sure all our delegates know is the world's largest global chemical company. And you're responsible for integration, operations, and the growth of domestic and overseas business units. Prior to BASF, you were General Manager of Engelhart, which is another USA-based Fortune 500 company. And I've got pages of this. I'm going to skip a bit because I do know that time is of an essence. But back in the day, you were the practical person running collaborative laboratories, and that's how you became my boss, and that's how we met. And collaborative laboratories, they got involved in several parent-owned companies, which are relevant, I think, to the delegates, because Philip Rockley was famous for simoleons, which I'm sure some of the older people remember was an excellent ingredient. There was the Collaborative Bio Alliance, which really the molecular biology that Paul's going to talk about later came from. Lab 21 Inc. Wasn't it too early? This was truly personalized cosmetics based on this high dispersion technology that Collaborative Laboratories was really pioneering. And also Clear Solutions Biotech, which did just about everything and anything you can do with hyaluronic acid, way before our time, I feel, but everything now of interest today. But today we're going to talk about molecular tagging. Now, you've got a bachelor's degree in biotechnology from the Rochester Institute of Technology and advanced professional training in various pharmaceutical sciences, emulsion chemistry, fermentation, bioprocessing, engineering, management disciplines. And you're the member of many professional organizations. But I know you as the person who's not too proud to get the spanner and go down and actually create the equipment that's needed to make things happen. So you're very hands-on, like Joe. So both Joes are very hands-on. And I know because you are very strong in biotechnology, you probably weren't as nervous as our delegates might be at using DNA molecules in tagging. So can you reassure everybody that these molecules are inert and safe, and that's why you're really quite happy to use them?
Wow, well, thank you so much, Barbara, for that amazing intro. You can open for me any day. And hearing all that, I now understand why my hair has turned so gray so fast. But I want to thank you, and thank you to Jane. And I'm so pleased to be part of this amazing expert panel to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to me and to our company. So as you said, real brief, Biocogent is a bioscience company. We're biotech at heart, and we're based in New York. And we invent and develop and commercialize skin active raw materials. And we spend a lot of time and money and invest a lot of people resources into developing these materials. And many of our customers, if not all our customers, are using the products that we invent to drive the claims of their products. So it becomes very important, and I am a firm believer in the claims that are being made, the brand protection, the brand security, the sustainability, and the molecular assurance of the products that we are offering and selling into the industry. And for that reason, we have several active programs and pilot studies ongoing for small companies and for Fortune 500 and 100 companies for tagging active ingredients, the materials that we and other people may make, excipients in some instances, and finished consumer products. So to the question at hand, we understand that DNA is about as inert as you can get. I mean, if you've eaten a salad lately, you've consumed a tremendous amount of DNA, or a steak, or anything really. It's everywhere in the environment, and we consume it. If you buy an extract, you put it on your skin, most likely there's going to be DNA in there. So there is no, and having worked with DNA my entire career, there is no concern, and especially the DNA that is being generated for these specific tags and whatnot. So for us, having this technology available, and let's say it, this is pretty amazing stuff. Having this technology available for our customers distills to, brand security for sure, sustainability, absolutely incredibly important, and for sure it plays a role there. Safety, and all these things distill down, to anyone who's listening in a corporate environment, distills down to profitability. And I don't think anybody here would deny that profitability is what drives the resources for further invention and discovery and research. So we're a believer in it. It's a very safe technology for sure. My colleague Paul, who's also online, is an expert in DNA and has worked with it his entire career. And it's all very, very relevant to today's desire for safe products, for products that are not adulterated, not diluted, not being generated by any of the means that you mentioned earlier, which are horrific to even state 41 million people in modern slavery. This is a technology that plays well in hand to ensure that that the customers that we supply, the end users, the consumers are getting a product that's as safe, as efficacious, that the claims being made are the claims that the product will deliver. And we're just very pleased to be, to have these active pilot programs running right now, which are, and some are very near commercial, and some are commercial actually. I think it's going to become pretty widespread as soon as the word gets out. And I think this panel is really important to get that word out.
Thanks, Joe. We had another colleague back in the day, Jim Wilmot, and one of his saying was, "It's okay, we're on the side of the angels." Now, I don't want you to libel yourself or say anything about any names, but when I worked with you, there were quite a few suppliers who weren't honest. Would you agree with me? Have you in your career found yourself working to make a brand honest when they discovered that a material they were using wasn't perhaps what it should have been, and the consequences are huge?
Yeah, without naming names, and I do have a black book, but without naming names, I think one of the biggest, there's challenges in several levels, but here's one, for example. A lot of companies are using TPM, so third-party manufacturers, to make their products. And it's a very competitive industry, and margins can be thin. So sometimes, there's second sourcing, perhaps there's other things going on, and you want to be sure that the product that they're making for you contains the active materials that you specified at the levels you specified. And this is one way of making sure that actually happens.
Make sure you're on the side of the angels. And I know from a formulator's point of view that when the formulator goes to the contract manufacturer, sometimes it separates, things go wrong. And it's very difficult, if not impossible, to reverse engineer to find out if everything was actually put in, even if it was put in at the right amount. So by having a DNA tag in the raw ingredient, you take a sample, and then, as Joe's explained, within minutes, tens of minutes anyway, you can show that all the materials should be in that were in. So this really is keeping you honest. And I think we can safely say the industry's got better, but it's still not perfect, is it?
Yeah, it's true, and it's not always nefarious. It's not always, done with intent. Sometimes just the tech transfer, the translation of the tech transfer to the, let's say it's a third-party manufacturer's system, they're being typed in manually. Sometimes a decimal gets misplaced or something. And this is a way of assuring that, as systems get updated and upgraded, things don't get lost. Periodic checking is an important aspect of this technology.
And even human error, because I know often language English, but maybe the person who's actually doing the compounding is a Spanish speaker, and no intention, but the wrong container got mixed in. So thanks, Joe. I'm sure we're going to come back to you. Right, over to Paul. Paul, who works with Joe. Right, Paul, you've received a doctorate in molecular biology at Stony Brook University, and you obtained a Bachelor of Science in molecular biology at the University of New Mexico. During your career, you've conducted biological research in academia, industry, and for the US government, and you've been working on very topically vaccines and antiviral therapy at Brooklyn National Laboratory and also on Plum Island Animal Disease Center. In industry, you've participated in biopharmaceutical research and development for the former Collaborative Bio Alliance that I mentioned earlier, Dow Chemicals, and you've also worked with Applied DNA Science in the production services for anti-counterfeiting. And currently you're working with Joe, and Joe was telling me earlier that you've got manuscripts that are just about to be published. So if you could help everybody here about the DNA in terms of whether it can go into a cell and be translated into anything, can it?
Well, thank you for that introduction, Barbara. And I'm very grateful to follow the two Joes, because they did an excellent job laying the foundation of what I want to talk about today. When it comes to the DNA getting into the cell and potentially translating something, if we're creating synthetic DNA taggants, there are ways to prevent that from ever happening, denying the sequence the opportunity to be translated, removing certain critical sequences that might lend to its interaction with the ribosomes in the cell. I don't want to get too technical, but I think high school biology reaches that level, and a lot of people are familiar.
Well, a lot of our delegates aren't really scientists, but the point is these tags are about, what, 200, 170 to 200 nucleotides long. They don't have that little starter bit that a ribosome needs to get started.
Exactly.
It's never going to happen, but even if it did, it would be nonsense that would be transformed, and the cells have autosomes which remove nonsense. So
absolutely.
And it would
they
also
have a way of getting rid of the garbage that accidentally happens. Even with normal cellular translation of messenger RNAs trying to produce certain proteins, it's not a perfect process. Mutations happen and you get defective RNAs and defective DNA sequences as well. And the cell has a way of weeding those things out and preventing their dispersion.
And we know, because of the vaccine work, especially that's coming out of Oxford, the UK, that in order to get DNA into cells, you have to be using things like other viruses, or you have to be using some very clever emulsion technology, nothing that we've ever come across in cosmetics or any of the other industries that you work with. So please, if you're thinking of GMO or you're thinking of anything in DNA technology, which is Jurassic Park, this is not that.
It's definitely not.
So DNA is code, isn't it?
Yeah, well, as Joe eloquently stated before, that you consume massive amounts of DNA every day just with your meals, which is why at least the United States FDA has declared a lot of DNA to be generally recognized as safe, or GRAS, as some people in the field call it. So consuming it's okay. Applying it to your skin is also okay. It's been shown to be relatively harmless. As Joe Greenwood aptly said, the PCR technology has come a long way. We can get so much DNA out of such a tiny sample. It's really evolved quite a bit since Carrie Mullis first delivered the technology to us in the early 80s. I think one of the things that is perhaps most exciting for the future of this, this is why I think of the four types of tag and technologies that exist in the modern age, I think DNA has the greatest legs, because molecular biologists such as Harvard scientist George Church have shown us that we can actually use DNA in ways we hadn't previously thought of, such as encoding messages. George Church, incidentally, I have his book that I'm about to talk about right here, took this book that he wrote back in 2010 and had it digitized into the binary computer language of ones and zeros, and then was able to take those ones and zeros and convert them into the DNA sequences of A's and T's and C's and G's, the letters of the DNA alphabet, and digitized his book and was able to upload 53,000 pages, 11 illustrations, and some JavaScript for good measure. And that was able to be transmitted in a droplet of DNA. Take this piece of paper here. You could put a droplet of DNA wherever you want on here, allow it to dry, put that in a FedEx envelope, ship that overseas. I'll send it to you, Barbara. You can cut out wherever the dot was, add some water, and you can begin amplifying the DNA that was there using PCR and begin a sequencing reaction. And then if you know your cipher for how the information was translated to a genetic language, you can upload everything.
And, you know, I think you can actually go online now and Google, and there's a page where you can put in as many of your C, G's, T's, A's, and it will translate live into binary code. So it's being used widely. I think that's something we should say to the delegates, that DNA technology really has taken off exponentially and is being used by so many different people in so many different worlds, that what we're doing is just grasping something out there that people do understand an awful lot about. And before I leave you, Paul, I know when you're at Applied DNA Sciences, you were part of the manufacturing. So we've talked of PCR being used to take the tag in the material and amplify it, but you actually use PCR to amplify the unique sequences that have been created. And these tags are double helix, which is why they're so stable, aren't they? Thanks,
Absolutely.
Paul. That's brilliant. Okay.
Yeah, and I just like one last note, if you even question the stability of DNA as a tagant, consider that we're now living in the era where Neanderthal DNA, the Genome Project, has come to life. And we have the sequence of Neanderthal DNA, a species that's been extinct for over 50,000 years.
It's incredible, isn't it? Shelf life of a cosmetic product could be 3 years, and we know the shelf life of DNA could be 3 million years, couldn't it? So that could be Jurassic Park. So thanks, Paul. I'm sure I'm going to come back with you to answer questions. So Cara, thank you so much for being with us today. Dr. Cara Cicero is VP Product Development and Management for Nutrition 21, and you manage the innovation pipeline, supply chain, and the IP portfolio. You were the second employee and Chief Scientific Officer at Sweet Defeat for 6 years, a DTC startup with products that reduce sugar cravings. It's interesting. And you've developed new ingredients and built the supply chain from ground up, which is why we need you today. Now, you've worked as product manager at Thermo Fisher Scientific for 4 years, and you have expertise in mass spectroscopy, as well as now DNA for today. And you earned your BS from Stonehill College and your PhD in organic chemistry from the University of Notre Dame. You're a lifelong student of science, wellness, and nutrition, native New Yorker, and a fiercely conscious mum, as I'm sure a lot of our delegates here are today. And your daughter's 2.5 years old, is that right? So,
correct.
Now, today you're going to bring your wealth of knowledge about the molecular tagging product, but it's how it plays out in the whole process. So that's working with the contract manufacturers, the business aspect, and the IP. Now, back in 2016, I was aware that aloe vera was being questioned by the nutritional market as to whether it was present or not in GNC and other companies' products. And then that spilled over into the cosmetic industry because people were testing to see if the ACE-Manan, I think was the marker at the time, they weren't finding it, so they were jumping to the conclusion that they were suspicious that that aloe vera wasn't present. So is this suspicion a problem in the nutrition industry? Do you have to be more careful than most to prove that you do have the actives in products as claimed?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of overlap between the nutritional supplement industry and the cosmetics industry. As you know, Joe said, we're selling claims. It's all about, does the product do what we say it does? In order to meet those claims, you have to make sure that your ingredient is actually in there.
And so what we do, yeah, I will say quickly that in the case of aloe vera, the jury's still out because the methods they used were at fault. But the companies did spend an awful lot of time trying to clear their name, which had they used DNA tagging, they could have done in minutes rather than years. So sorry, Cara, do continue. Sorry.
Sure. So I just thought, let me give you guys a little bit of background about what we do at Nutrition 21. I think you might find that there's some overlap in some of the processes that you're developing, and I can talk through how we're using the molecular tag right now that is provided by Applied DNA Sciences. So at Nutrition 21, we develop and manufacture branded ingredients that are clinically substantiated, and we sell these ingredients to our brand marketers that put them in supplements. And we're the first company in the nutritional space to add the molecular tag to our products. And this really helps us to protect our IP. We spend a lot of time, money, resources in developing our ingredients. We protect them with IP, we clinically substantiate them. So we have this package, and we want to make sure that our end users, the customers, are getting products that contain our ingredients. So we've been able to incorporate the molecular tag into our manufacturing processes for a few of our products, most notably one of our main products. So the marker is carried through the entire manufacturing process. We haven't had any issues. It's been straightforward to incorporate. And then our product is shipped to contract manufacturers that then are incorporating it further into complex formulations that are designed by their customers. And we're able to detect and quantify the tag, and then from there back calculate how much of our ingredient has been formulated into those products. So it's been really important for us. It allows us to really police our industry. It allows us to ensure that our customers are getting products that they think they're paying for. Additionally, we can also identify any adulterants, and this is huge. I mean, Joe mentioned this too, around you're working with a third-party manufacturer and you're trusting them. They're usually placing POs on your behalf, purchasing ingredients. And how do you really know, especially when you have complex formulations and it's difficult to identify everything after it's been blended? So this is also a way for us to help our customers know that their contract manufacturers are honest. So it's just been a really successful program for us. And just as by way of background, I'm not a molecular biologist. My background is chemistry. This has been really easy to work with, and we've had full support of Applied DNA Sciences in helping us do a lot of the product development to get this to be successful.
And the other techniques, I mean, we talked about mass spectroscopy. I know with the ACE-Manan, it's NMR that people use. These are usually laboratory based, aren't they? They're things where you send your sample away and a week later you get an answer. They're nowhere near as portable and as easy to use as the PCR tests.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for us personally, we don't use NMR as part of release testing. We have a bunch of other analytical tests that we use, and we use third-party labs to do that, to help us to do our product release. However, the marker is super straightforward, and it's data that we really trust.
Now, I know I was going to ask Paul about this, but Cara, you're not a molecular biologist, it's not fair. The barcode of life, that's where we're talking about genomic DNA, isn't it? That's where we're looking at the taxonomy of the individual species. So if we're talking about a health supplement that comes from a whole plant, it might possibly have the genomic material with it, but it's likely in processing to be lost. Or you're talking about materials that have been isolated and purified and separated a long time away from the original DNA, aren't you, when you're talking about your health supplements?
Well, at Nutrition 21, our manufacturing process doesn't involve plant extracts, but I can speak to that. It just in my previous life, where yes, when you're working with a plant extract and you're doing a lot of purification processes, yeah, a lot of that material is going to be lost as you're getting to a high purity material.
And the joy of tagging, I always think of it as when I go to the airport, my suitcase, I tag my suitcase, because when I look at all the suitcases coming off the plane, all the black ones look the same, but there's only one that's got my tagging on. So you, as you say, you're not dealing necessarily with materials that would have genomic DNA. You can tag them. And if you were dealing with genomic materials, the genomic material will probably be lost. And if we were talking about synthetic materials, the silicons, etc., they never had any DNA in the first place. So although it's a nice idea to think of using the DNA that comes with the botanical, that's not realistic, is it, for what we're talking about? We're talking about tagging, like tagging a suitcase. So do you find that because your contract manufacturers know you use DNA tagging, that makes them very careful to not make mistakes?
Well, we have really great relationship with our contract manufacturers, so I'm not concerned about that. They're partners for us, and we work with them in the process. So bringing authentication into this is just really positive for them too. Where we're seeing
it's something to be proud of, isn't it? If you've made something and it's good, why wouldn't you tag it so that you make sure that it is going to be, as the consumer gets it, as it should be? Thanks so much. Very much. We'll come back to you, I'm sure, again, Cara. I'd like to move now to Warren. So we're moving from the United States now to Scotland. So Warren is our expert today on talking about sustainability and complements the Cosmetic Cluster UK as being a consortium, a group of people, because Dr. Warren Bowden is a chartered environmentalist and the Scottish Leather Group Sustainability and Innovation Director, and you're the biggest processor of bovine collagen in the UK. Is that fair? It is. You're a fellow of the Society of Leather Chemists and inventor of the pioneering and patented thermal energy plant. You've spent 18 years of your 25-year career within the sector, leading the multi-award-winning sustainability agenda through circularizing leather manufacture to net zero. Additionally, Warren is a circular ambassador and director of Leather UK. And as we say, Scottish Leather Group, the largest producer of leather in the UK. And you were saying that 10% of what you do is leather. The other 90% goes to all the other materials and industries that use collagen. I know that back in 2013, and many of the UK delegates will know, that there was a terrible scandal, wasn't there, where horse meat was found in food products that should have had beef in. And we know that there isn't an industry that takes more care in looking at supply chains than the food industry. So this, to me, is just proof that even the most well-meaning people who believe things are right, mistakes are made. So in your industry, you were saying you have to be 100% traceable. Is that correct?
Barbara, thank you for that introduction. Firstly, I'll have to apologize to you just in case I do break up. I think I'm in the middle of what we call the eye of the storm, because it's just passed over. I can't see anything else on the screen, but I can hear you all. So hopefully you can all hear me.
We can hear you, yes.
Thank you, good. Just to follow that up, Scottish Leather Group is as far as I know, the largest processor of bovine collagen in the UK. We process, roughly speaking, 40 or 50% of all of the bovine or hide collagen that's processed, but perhaps as you introduced, Barbara, only about 10% of that by weight is actually going to make leather. The other proportion, a variety of uses, protein hydrolysate, protein that goes into food sector, and I'm sure is used supplementary elsewhere. And I won't come on to the detail of that is for commercial reasons, but our supply chain has gone through, I think, the turmoil that many other supply chains are going through today, post-COVID. As you mentioned, there was the horse meat scandal in terms of supplying human food. Prior to that, the BSE crisis that many of us will remember in the UK. And what came out of that was really a huge traceability scheme. We know it in the UK as a CTS, there's various other names for it elsewhere. But the key thing for me and this journey that we've been on for about 18 years has been to escalate this issue of provenance, credibility, transparency of where we get, what we get, and where it goes to. That's been a key piece of our whole sustainability journey. It's kind of moving the CSR agenda along to ESG, where although the environment and the social aspects are important and we can't ignore them, we mustn't, but the regulatory activities, the governance piece is actually for us one of the most important ones, if not the key thing, because not only is it right for us to say what we do, it's actually more important for others to inspect and present what we do on our behalf. Just to give you some indication, we have more accreditations and certificates than we have directors. Most of our activities are measured and monitored online, real time, by the regulatory bodies that we're accredited to. You can't necessarily do that sort of thing with the social aspects, but our own supply chain credibility comes from our investigations being third-party audited by international bodies. Just to give an example, our life cycle analysis for our product, that's our key product and the byproducts, is created by a third party using data that's audited by 3 separate bodies to give 3 layers of certification, certified to the UN SDGs, 17 of them. All 17 of them are separately audited. So there's a whole, if you like, raft or data bank of credibility that goes towards our customers and towards their consumers. To me, I think you really introduced this well when you mentioned Anne Reid's piece about consumer choice. I think this is something that I've very much seen over the last, I think, 3 or 4 years in particular. The issue of true cost. For me, this is the issue of provenance. But the question that we still need to address as consumers, because we're all consumers, is, well, when does green trump low cost? Because until we all recognize that buying cheap probably means that we're not buying the provenance we want, we need to start changing the way that we deal with things, because the protein market that we're in is no different to any of the other sectors. We also present, if it's required, the facility for our leather products to have almost greater provenance than, you know, the piece of beef that many will be putting on their table on a, you know, on a Sunday afternoon, to the point where you know where it came from, you know the footprint of it, you know the ethics of who produced it, which hands handled it, and indeed even individually where it goes to in each individual article that it ends up on. There is a huge amount of work within the industry to not only justify this to ourselves, but actually to prove it directly to the end consumer. I could go on forever on this. This is my hobby.
And I could listen to you forever. What really excites me is the fact that if we get 100% secure supply chains, we eliminate the dark economy, because we could all be choosing that green, sustainable product. But if it's not what we think it is, then we've wasted our money. So it really, this is, and the technology's there. I mean, not just DNA technology, the technologies are out there. And we should go away from this webinar today and make sure that we're demanding of our suppliers that they are using these physical chemical identifiers, just as the pharmaceutical industry does, prove and trace and follow and make sure things are secure. Warren, before I lose you, I'd like you to talk just a little bit about blockchain, because it was mentioned earlier that the paper trail could be Chinese whispers or telephone game for people in America. I know that in the jobs I've held in the past, someone has asked me, was child labour used to make this product? And I phone up the person before me and say, was child labour? Now, if anybody in that line says yes, there's no sale. So no one's going to say yes. So you're using blockchain, aren't you?
We have used blockchain. And I think this is one of the really interesting pieces, because blockchain was touted as being, if you like, one of the credible layers that's managed independently. It asks the question, where is blockchain being regulated by? But blockchain itself requires trust points. Now, we're really fortunate in the UK, from what I've just explained, in that we have layers upon layers of trust points, which we can apply blockchain technology to. One of the, in fact, I've just left a call prior to this, which was actually talking about applying blockchain on a global basis. And it's interesting that I think there is a reluctance to do so, because the trust points just aren't there. And actually, blockchain itself is being superseded by more layers of credibility, rather than just applying, if you like, a digital twin to a paper trail. The levels of credibility are already there, and it's almost as if we bypass blockchain. It's not that we're going to bypass it, but blockchain has been part of our offering to consumers. It has to be said, there hasn't been a huge consumer demand to say, prove that this is the case, because there's almost an inherent that it has to be the case before it's placed on the market. But yeah, to answer the question, Barbara, we use blockchain, we have used it.
I think for me, and perhaps Joe Chicoli will back me up on this, there's pressure on some of the not so reputable companies who, for example, there's a shelf life date on a particular material, and the C of A and the specifications clearly say it, but large amounts are in the warehouse and somebody wants it. Now, without a digital blockchain secure system, somebody could accidentally use the TIPEX to change that date, and nobody could be any the wiser, because once it's on that Chinese whisper document trail, it just gets copied again and again. I mean, Joe, could that have happened in the past, do you think?
I think so. To me, sorry, I know that was directed at Joe, but just from our manufacturing perspective, if I might, for 30 seconds, when we apply blockchain, it's every aspect of the supply chain, from the raw material right the way through to the tier one. And that custody has to be applied. That's about 25 process steps. Anyone who knows anything about blockchain knows you can't falsify that.
Well, thanks for saying that. Jane did ask me prior to this if I would give somebody a blockchain 101 that I gave Kirsty and Jane, because it is very complicated. You've not come across again. So if there's anybody amongst delegates who'd like to sit in on it, I've got some very simplistic ways of explaining blockchain just to make people understand it. But the key thing is all the digital information is shared with all the parties involved. So if somebody does make a change, the amount of computing effort to make it happen, it's not going to happen. I think you have to own 50% of the people in the blockchain and have them as criminal elements to make a change. So it's not 100% perfect, but it's 99.99%. So it's good. So seriously, however the UK, Cosmetic Cluster UK wants to do it, I'm more than happy to give a quick tutorial on blockchain. Warren, thank you. Can I move quick? I'm looking at the time. So we're doing well. We're just on time. Can I move to Jason now? Because Jason uses blockchain. And Jason, you are a strategic thinker specializing in business development, advocacy, and integrated communication. And you've worked for high-profile Fortune 500 brands over the last 20 years. To articulate sustainability, resonant financing, and marketing campaigns. You are the Chief Revenue Officer of Floral Growth Corp. And as your background clearly shows, your present interest is in cannabis. And I know that the cosmetic industry is extremely interested in CBD oil at the moment. So prior to forming the Flora Group, you worked the last 15 years as Chief Executive in competitive advertising, communications, and emergency technology fields, working with fast-paced startups, navigating the scrutiny of public companies. You're sitting in Canada at the moment, so we've left Scotland now. Probably
we're hopping back and forth across the Atlantic. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Jane, for this opportunity. So Flora Growth is a cannabis company. That's a very large term nowadays, but it kind of touches on kind of a piece of everyone's today. So maybe it's good on the last one. So we are in a heavily scrutinized industry that has a large gray market or legacy market participants at all points of the supply chain who are very actively looking to interject materials, be it API into cosmetics or even into final products. So as a global industry, we operate with a complete larger shadow industry simultaneously. So having the ability to have provenance over materials is really at the top of the forefront of every government who's ever considered cannabis or cannabinoids in general as an entry point into their economic system. There's a constant need for validation at a forensic level, at just a traceability supply chain level, and as you just kind of alluded to, it as a digital level. So we employ many versions of what we've heard today, from an extraction to an isolation of a molecule, whether it be in a cannabinoid or whether it be into something as an emulsion into a cosmetic, or even just the flower, the actual plant itself can be tagged and transported around the world. Our big thing is the trust it has on the larger consumer base. Because we operate as a global company, we need to communicate all this provenance simultaneously with many, many customer groups, whether it be contract manufacturers, whether it be final customers, or maybe it be white label products for a larger brand. What that really means is that we're actually communicating the actual makeup of the material, but we're talking about the provenance of material, the elements of the microbials, the heavy metal testing. There's so much more data than just is the product. So all that information has to be contained. And we have found that blockchain, while not perfect, is that non-appendable distributed ledger. All of us have the same information simultaneously. And our customers are able to look at that information and see the batch, the lot, the control. We have a physical identifier through the applied DNA molecule, or through that, as well as the digital appendage of that transaction. So all of the data that we require as part of a cannabis operator, and every market is different, is available to our customers through those levels of portals of traceability.
And as Paul was saying, the DNA is code, and that code can be turned from the 4 code into binary code, the 2 code, and then it becomes part of that digital document. So if someone physically takes a container of, say, CBD oil, and they swap it with something which isn't CBD oil, or is but came from the wrong source, if it hasn't got that code in, when it's sampled, it will not match that blockchain document, and immediately you know that something wrong has happened and you can correct it. So I think the 2 go together, don't they?
They do fit really well together. We see it as a very logical connection point, both from it's difficult, I think Joe Greenwood said in the beginning, it's very easy to test the pieces, but maybe not a consumer in the field has the access to trace that. So it's better to have the blockchain for us, because we can communicate that at consumer levels or brand levels to make sure that there's that traceability can be all the way built in. In our industry,
you could say it is like the Rosetta Stone, because we all know there are lots of other ways of putting in various materials to trace things, but none of them are code. So you'd have to do a translator into some type of code to put it into blockchain. And there's another area that's risk, whereas the fact it is code, it can be read with next generation sequencing, with PCR. You know for sure that that container of that CBD oil matches those documents.
And our industry is inherent with it. I think Kara had mentioned a little bit, we're mixing many things, and unfortunately, we have a legacy market that has the same APIs, the same inputs, and is very interested in getting illegal materials into legal supply chains. So having even something that would be partially ours, produced from one of our farms or one of our GMP facilities, and that is mixed with another product at some point down the supply chain, could be tested to have CBD. But is it our CBD? Is it legal CBD? Is it produced, as we've talked about in this whole conference, is it done ethically? Is it done responsibly? In our case, is it done organically? There are so many parts that can be modified. So having the ability to not only forensically verify the materials, or whether it be API or just the flower, as well as then translate that to the community is important. For a global producer who's not in a smaller vertical supply chain, where we're talking about one to many, we need to translate that information continuously. And as the larger CPG brands and cosmetics and other people look at cannabinoids as the next evolution of ingredients, how do you then translate legal markets to the safety and the feeling of security of using these type of materials?
I mean, you go back to the barcode of life again, because every cannabis has got the same barcode of life, but the one that you tagged that was grown in that field in, shall we say, Poland, you can follow it from that field. Each tag could represent a different season, could be a different farm. You can really, it is a proper barcode, as we're used to having barcodes of information.
And making sure that it's not mixed. The matrix is the danger, because it's very difficult to unwind it. And I hate to say, unfortunately, there are bad actors in the field. And if there's something that goes wrong, and there was a little bit in the US, the vaping crisis, where there was counterfeit materials that were shown to have vitamin D in the vaping cartridges, and they were pretending to be legitimate brands, and they caused a lot of real traumatic events just prior to COVID. So that, for a brand in an international sense, if your product is being counterfeited, that you have no reliability to actually have a way to defend yourself, is actually, the liabilities are immense.
I mean, this is brilliant because cosmovigilance, all brands are always worried. Now, if a product has been contaminated, to be able to prove in tens of minutes that no, that ingredient wasn't mine, or the ingredient that I use is in it, so this one that is safe is mine, whereas the one you've got isn't, is such a valuable thing, isn't it, to brands altogether. I'm very conscious now that we've come up to the end of our time, and I'm pleased that all of you have had a chance to say things. While Kirsty is going to sort out the questions that's come from the delegates, could we put, Kirsty, that poll up again and see if people have changed their opinion, having listened to all the experts? So this is the results of the poll this morning, that you all agree transparency is important. Well, I'm so pleased. That's why you were here. Thank you. Are you confident that the materials you use are free from modern slavery? A few of you were very confident. The majority said they didn't know. And we do have people who really are, as I feel you should be, don't know. And how many are sure they were claims they made by brand suppliers are correct? And what's frightening is this is before we started speaking, most of you weren't sure. So that proves we really do need to secure our supply chains so that next time you're asked, because you've demanded of your suppliers that they need to use tagging, then you can be 100% sure. The 50% who were sure, I wonder when we see their answer in a moment whether they're still sure. So that was the one that we did. Can we, Kirsty, now ask that poll again and see if people have changed their minds?
I'm going to see if I can change that again. Just give me a second.
Okay, you've been doing very well there in your technical hot seat. And I hope the delegates, I can see that we've got a huge number with us. I hope that questions have been coming. So if you try again now. So it was really the last one, I think, Kirsty. Let's just go to question 3, because that's the one. After hearing today's webinar, how sure are you that the claims made by your brand and suppliers are correct in terms of if they say it's sustainable, the ingredients they use? Are you still so sure as you were before? Just tick the box that you think. So when you see that the brand claims that they've used a material that's RSPO and it's come from the sustainable rainforest plantation, are you sure nobody swapped it if they're not using a molecular tag and they're not using blockchain to make sure their documents are secure? Because I tell you, the dark economy is huge and it's growing all the time, and there are not warehouses around the world filling up with things. Right, well, everybody 100% sure that transparency is important in the cosmetic industry. Consumers are demanding it, and we now have the technology to achieve it. I'm very pleased that those who are very sure now realise that, as we've said, not always dishonesty. As Joe said, it sometimes can just be mistakes that are made, but they are made, and we don't know, so we need to check. So let's make a difference. Let's go out there now. Let's insist that supply chains use molecular tags, and then we can be secure, and then we can make a difference to the orangutan. So Kirsty, do you have a wealth of questions to bring up?
I don't. I'm sorry. I've got no questions. I've been asking along the way. I've got nothing. But I know that everybody has been paying attention. There's been lots going on in the chat with me posting things and stuff. But no questions. So I've shared some emails. I've shared LinkedIn profiles.
Kirsty, as someone like Paul who's lectured to academia, that means one of two things. Either we've made everybody fall asleep, or we actually did what you asked us to do, which was touch on all the things that people need to know about DNA technology and molecular tagging. So I'm going to plump for the last, that we actually said everything. But what I do know, Kirsty, is if the delegates ask you questions, either sending to the Cosmetic Cluster UK or put the questions up here, you will put them to the panelists so they get the answers they need, won't you? And I think you were going to put contact details up so that all the panelists can be contacted. Is that right?
I will. And I will quickly just share emails as well.
And if you haven't seen Anne Reid's video, I do apologise to people in America, because I think sometimes the YouTubes don't play if it's a BBC thing. But what she basically says is it really is all our fault. Every time we buy that T-shirt that's very cheap, only a tiny bit we know is going to go to the poor producer. So we have to change our ways. And in the UK, when you drive into your supermarket and have your car washed and you only pay £5, obviously that person is not getting a fair wage. So, you know, it is up to us. And we talked about consortiums. I know the Leather Consortium was how you got involved with DNA, and that was working together. So delegates who are listening, if you think that this is not something for you on your own, work with the UK Cosmetic Cluster, because a group of you insisting that your suppliers make your ingredients secure, then the supplier will do it. I've spoken to a lot of cosmetic ingredient suppliers, and they all say the same thing. If the customer wants it, we will do it. So, and again, back to my history, I started off with Anita Roddick at the Body Shop, and we did the rolling rule on animal testing. We insisted we wouldn't use ingredients that had been tested before, after 1990. And as a consequence, the animal testing regulation in Europe changed. So we don't test on ingredients on animals. So together we can make the industry secure the supply chains, but we have to work together. And we've talked about cannabis. I think we've probably, yes, we've lost Jason, but I know that in Europe the regulations insist that you can only use certain varieties. Well, again, it's impossible once you've lost that genomic DNA to actually say whether the CBD oil you have came from that variety or not. So if you're challenged and you challenge your supplier, how can they prove it? Well, the way they can prove it is by having molecular tagging. So I think that's only for me now to say thank you to all our panelists for giving us your time. I honestly can't believe the gravitas of you all. We've managed to get you together. So thank you. And Jane, thank you, and Kirsty for the Cosmetic Cluster UK giving us this opportunity. Brilliant.
And I'd like to say thanks on behalf of CC UK as well to all the panelists and everybody who's joined in. I think it's a really important topic, and this afternoon has gone some way to demystifying it, I think, really, as well as showing how people are actually able to use the technology. So I think it's a really great initiative that we've been able to bring you all together, and hopefully we can have more conversations in the future. And please follow CC UK if you can on LinkedIn, visit our website, attend our webinars, and together as an industry we can collaborate and answer some of these issues and questions that that are really important for the consumer. So thanks again, everybody, and until the next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.